Good morning, everybody. Josiah here, leaving my house a little late to go to work. So very, not good. It's not good. I'm a little late. However, I go to work pretty early. Like I get there early, so I shouldn't be late for work. It's just my video's not going to be as long. But anywho, good morning, everybody. Josiah here, and today we're going to be talking about the Quran in Islam, in Christianity. Now, why do I bring this up? Why is a Christian reading the Quran? Why is a Christian reading the Quran? And by the way, I do have to put this out there. I am driving, so I'm not going to be focusing on questions on my chat. I'm going to get to the questions and comments in my chat once I park, because I'm driving, and it's not smart to read your phone while you drive. So I'm going to do this legally, hands-free, as I'm supposed to, and everything should be good. But seriously, why is a Christian reading the Quran? Now, the Christians out there are going to think, oh, why is he reading the Quran? Is he being deceived? The Christians out there are going to think, oh, why is this Christian reading the Quran? Like, that's a cursed book. That's an ungodly book. And the atheists out there will be like, oh, it's just another fairy tale, just like the Bible. Or the Muslims out there may be like, oh, this Christian's about to understand the truth of Islam. He's reading the Quran. Of course he's going to come to know the truth. And every other person is probably going to have a different reaction when they hear that a Christian is reading the Quran. But several months ago, I was making a live stream, and a Muslim got on my live stream, and he started telling me just bogus stuff that he thought was in the Bible, because that's what he was told by Muslims and by his imam. He was told that Christians worship three gods. He was told that Christians do this and Christians do that. And it wasn't true. None of it was true. And so I told him, like, none of this is true. And so I made some comments about the Quran. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that he had never read the Bible and I had never read the Quran. And so he says, I'm not an expert in the Bible. Well, and I said, well, I'm not an expert in the Quran. One of them has got to be the truth if either of them are true. They cannot both be true. But one of them ought to be the truth if one of our religions is right. And so with that said, as a Christian, I decided I was going to read the Quran, because I get a lot of Muslim people on my streams, and they have all these questions, and they have all these gotcha moments. They're trying to get me. They're trying to get me in a corner. And most of the time it doesn't work, because a lot of them don't really understand what Christians believe. Now some of them bring up some good points, but most of the comments and questions I get from Muslims are problematic, not due to them being smart, although I'm sure there's a lot of smart Muslim people out there, but due to them not actually understanding what Christians believe. Like, a lot of them actually don't understand what Christians believe. But I digress. What do I think of the Quran as of right now? I've gotten to Surah 9, 8, 9. I think I just read Surah 8. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the Quran, and the farther I get into it, the more violent it gets. Like the last surah I read, I believe is chapter 8, it says to go and kill the polytheists. Go kill them. And that these people are basically detested by God, and the way of the believer is to kill and be killed. That was the most recent chapter I read. And I was thinking, wow, Islam really teaches its followers to go kill polytheists. And don't spare them unless they change their ways or they had a previous covenant before they're commanded to kill them. And something I noticed is that it says, as is the way of all the believers, and I'm not going to quote directly because I didn't memorize it. I read it one time. And so for those of you Muslims out there, I'm not trying to blaspheme your book by misquoting it. But generally what it said is that those of the Torah and those of the gospel and those of the Quran, of the book and the messenger, they kill and be killed, and that's how they stand up for God. I mean, no disrespect. Christianity was not built, and the principles and laws of Christianity were not enforced by those who follow Jesus, killing the polytheists or the people they disagree with. It was not built on that. Some people say, "Oh, the Crusades." Whether the Crusades were good or bad, that was like hundreds of years after Christianity came about. Jesus never, ever taught us to go and kill people for our faith. But the Quran teaches us that we were supposed to. Jesus never taught that. Ever, ever, ever did he teach that Christians, that their duty was to kill and be killed. When us Christians, when we're killed for our faith, it's not because we're killing someone else. It's because we're preaching truth and life to them. That's why Christians are killed in their early church. That's why many Christians are killed today. And may I note, in a lot of Muslim countries, other countries too, but mainly Muslim countries right now, is because we preach and share the love and the power of Jesus. We were never commanded to go and make converts by killing. We were never commanded to do that. Yet the Quran seems to make this claim that Christians were commanded to kill. In fact, Jesus taught something very different. We have our Bibles are based on manuscripts that we have that by hundreds of years predate the Quran, predate Islam. Islam is a new religion. It has nothing to do with Christianity except it uses Christian characters. And it claims to be from the same God. But we have had our Bible hundreds of years before Muhammad was born. Before the Quran was, quote unquote, revealed, as according to the Muslims. And so Christianity had been going around for a long time already. We already knew what Jesus taught on these things. In fact, we have early manuscripts even from the lives of the apostles. I mean, think about that. We have manuscripts that are dated back to the lives of the apostles, and those may not even be the original ones, but we have them back to there. Maybe they're the originals, I don't know. I don't think anyone can know for sure. But it dates back, far, far back. I would rather believe the people that knew Jesus, that talked to Jesus, or that at least lived in Jesus's time. When it comes to killing other people, that Jesus taught us not to kill, but rather Jesus told Christians Jesus told Christians to bless your enemies and to love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Bless and do not curse. If your enemy is hungry, give him something to eat. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. The Quran teaches, go kill the... And that Jews and Christians were commanded the same thing. No. In fact, outside of Israel being commanded to take over Canaan for the atrocities that Canaan was committing, God never commanded Israel to go into far countries and kill polytheists and try to subdue them and cause them to become Israeli. That's not what they did. There was the land of Canaan that I guess you could say they dispossessed, or they possessed, they took authority over. But other than that, which by the way, Canaan was a very evil place. Other than that, they weren't commanded to go past that. And so Christians weren't commanded to kill anybody. But instead, when we're killed for our faith, not for the killing of others. You know, it's interesting, and maybe not every Muslim is like this, but it's interesting, it seems to be that Muslims become martyrs fight. Christians become martyrs when they don't go and fight. Christians become martyrs when they stick to what Jesus commanded them and taught them, and they're killed for it because people hate Jesus. Muslims, they say they believe in Jesus, but ultimately they hate what Jesus taught because it's directly against their religion, the historical Jesus. And so Christian martyrs are killed for doing good. Muslim martyrs, many of them, are killed for going out to war. That's not the same. We're not the same. One is obviously more pious than the other. Obviously more pious than the other. If anybody goes to war with anybody and they get killed because they went to go fight and they went to go war, they're not a martyr, especially if they're the aggressor. They aggressed. And when people, we could say the polytheists, when the polytheists fight back and they don't like being killed, and so they kill the people that are trying to kill them, you're not a martyr. You are the aggressor. Maybe in Islam you're a martyr. But Jesus taught us, no, don't do that. Jesus taught the Christians a different way, not the way of death, not the way of killing. Jesus taught us to die to ourselves and do good, and to preach forgiveness of sins, repentance toward God, and faith toward God, and faith in Jesus Christ. We're taught something totally different. And, I find that an issue. I find that a problem. That the Quran makes the claim. The Quran makes a claim that the people of the gospel fought and they killed and were killed. That's not true. That's not true. Jesus never taught us that. That's a lie. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's just a lie. Christians didn't advance their religion, especially in the first 600 years of Christianity. You may be able to go even prior to that, but especially during the time of Jesus and the centuries after, they never progressed Christianity that way. Ever. Ever. Wild. Wild. Now, here's another thing about the Quran that I've noticed. Now, so far twice, the Quran stated that the Torah was given to the Jews, and that the Torah was a manuscript, it was a book that they had access to at the time. You can find it in Surah 6, and I think there's another passage in Surah 2, but especially the one in Surah 6. And it's interesting that Muhammad claims, or the writer of the Quran claims, that Islam is like a continuation of the original religion that the Jews and the Christians seem to lose, that they strayed away from. They aren't following God like they're supposed to, according to Islam. But it still makes a claim that the Jews had their book with them, and that they could actually go to the Torah and find the things that Muhammad was saying in the Torah. But here's the problem. If that were the case, why does Islam teach the opposite of the Torah? For example, there's a passage where in the Quran, it states that, the clean and unclean laws found in the Torah were for the Muslim. And that pigs were like definitely you shouldn't eat. But then it talked about eating camels. But in the Torah, it says you shouldn't eat camels. And so we got a problem. And this is, honestly, I think this is less of a problem, but it's a problem for the consistency of the Quran. The Torah says don't eat camels. The Quran says follow the Torah, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm not saying verbatim, but it basically says follow the Torah in what it revealed to you concerning what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. But then it says, but you can eat camels. And eating camels is like something that is accepted in parts of Islam, at least. Yeah, that's a contradiction. I don't know how else to say it. You can't follow the kosher laws of the Torah and eat a camel at the same time. Eating a camel is one and the same as eating a pig in the Torah. So did God change? Did God's opinion on clean and unclean meats change? I don't believe so. And I'm a Christian. I don't eat pork. And, I'm probably not going to eat a camel unless I'm going to die of starvation. Because the Bible tells me not to. But here's the problem with the Quran. It claims that the Old Testament of the Bible was true and that they had it during Muhammad's time. And we have the Torah that he had during his time. We have the Torah that they had hundreds, thousands of years before his time. And that Torah states that you shouldn't eat a camel. So either the Quran is right, and maybe someone can correct me and tell me the Quran isn't teaching us to eat camels or that it's okay. Maybe I just misunderstood the verse. But as a first-time reader, it sure sounds like that's what it's talking about. Okay? Yeah, I just want to be honest here. It sounds like that's what it's talking about. If the Quran is true about itself being inspired by God and without error, then that means that it's also false. So here's what I'm saying. If the Quran claims that the truth was revealed in the Torah, but then the Torah contradicts the Quran made a false statement. It promoted a false book. It promoted a book that either was true or was not true, but still promoting. So here's the problem. If the Torah is true, like the Quran seems to say, then the Quran's false because it teaches the opposite of the Torah in many aspects. But if the Torah is not true, then the Quran is still false because it tells us that the Torah is true. That at least the Jews are supposed to judge by what God has given them, that's with them in the Torah. So either way, the Quran was false, at least in that aspect. Now maybe I would be willing to concede, well, it's a book, and maybe there's a couple errors here, but the main message is true. Okay, possibly. You could say that that's a possibility. But you can't claim it's like this. It's like these people on here, they say Josiah is gay. But then I say, I'm not gay. I say being gay would be an abomination to God, and he hates it. And I'm not that. One of us is right. One of us is wrong. But the person accusing me of being gay can't say, oh, I taught it's okay to be gay, because I didn't. Otherwise, they'd just be lying. Do you see the contradiction here? It's a problem. And here's another one. I think this one is more serious. I think it was in chapter 2 of the Quran. It taught, once again, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I read. It seemed to teach that if a woman was divorced of her husband, she was not allowed to go back to him until she remarried and got divorced again. So in order to go back to your husband, ladies, according to the Quran, your original husband that you were first with, that you should have stayed with as much as possible, but the Quran has a different view of sexual morality than the Bible does. But if a woman is divorced of her husband, she has to marry another before she comes back to her husband. So if she's divorced from her husband, here's husband, she leaves him. She marries another dude. The only time she can come back to her first dude is if she divorces the second dude and comes back to the first. If she leaves the first, she can't come right back to him. She has to marry someone else first. And so, unless I'm wrong, I'm willing to say, hey, it's possible I misread. But it seemed like this is what it was saying. Okay? It seemed like this is what it was saying. That a woman cannot come back to her husband until she's married and divorced again. But the Torah, and this is actually right after it confirmed the truth of the Torah. The Torah says that's an abomination to God. The Torah says if a woman is divorced and marries another man, and she gets divorced again, she is not allowed to go back to her first husband. And that it's an abomination. So the question is that an abomination or not? Is that morally wrong or not? The Quran says no, but that's how it ought to be. The Torah says, yes, it should never be that way. They say two completely opposite things. Two completely opposite things. Once again, I'm not trying to lie. This is what I've observed. I've read the Torah several times as a Christian. I think the Torah is for Christians because it was revealed by God. The Torah, the Gospels, are for those who believe in Jesus. And so it's like you can't have both. If you claim the Torah is true, then you have to be false because you're teaching the opposite of the Torah. But then if you claim the Torah is false or that the Torah is corrupted, the Quran teaches that it's not. That it's not corrupted and that they had it with them in their hands. It can't be both, guys. It cannot be both. And I say this with respect. I mean no disrespect. I'm just trying to communicate what I've been observing reading the Quran. I'm just trying to communicate it. I mean, the Quran also makes a bunch of claims about Jesus that just aren't historically accurate. and not what Jesus taught himself, what we know he taught. And the thing is, like Muslims, they try to get around that by saying, oh, the gospel was corrupt, so we can't believe anything in it. You mean you're going to believe someone that came 600 years later? He came 5 to 600 years after Jesus, and then he started making claims about Jesus that the Christians never believed. I would rather believe the people that knew Jesus, that walked with Jesus, that talked with Jesus, rather than this person that claimed some type of divine revelation and got the truth about who Jesus really was. I would rather trust the people who knew him than the guy who didn't know him. I mean, honestly, think about it, guys. Anybody is able to come and claim that they're a prophet or that they're God. Anybody can do that. Anybody could claim that they're the last prophet. Anybody could do that. We've had lots of people do that. And I'm not just talking about Muhammad. We have lots of people do that. And so we have all these people coming up throughout the generations saying, oh, I'm the true prophet. You have to follow what I say because I'm speaking for God. All sorts of people doing that. But what did Jesus say himself? Am I just to take one person over another? Or should I take the person that they all refer to and claim to be the continuation of? If I know what he teaches, then I'll know whether or not these people are telling the truth. Okay, I probably got tons of comments here. Okay, Jolene says, why do people believe in religion? A lot of them is because they have experience. A lot of them is because they have, religion seems to be really good for them. I have an experience and I think it's really good. Oh says he's not looking at chat. Yes, I was not looking at chat because I was driving. That would have been dumb to look at the chat. Yasia says, hey, Josiah. Jolene says, it is man-made. There is only one God. Yeah. There's only one God. Yasia says, while he's driving, he won't read our comments. Yeah, I don't read comments while I drive. Ona says, Trinity is a mystery. No one understands it. I don't think it's that much of a mystery myself. Like, I believe in the Trinity because I'm a Christian, or in, maybe you could say, the Godhead, because some people don't like that word Trinity. Oh, it's not found in the Bible. Okay, I believe in the Godhead because I'm a Christian. I don't think it's that hard to understand. People are like, oh, it's a mystery. Is it really that much of a mystery that God can intervene in the human world? That the God who created everything couldn't actually come and minister to us in that creation? I don't think so. That doesn't seem like a big mystery to me. People say, oh, it's a mystery. I don't think it's a mystery. I think it's pretty easy to understand. Ona says, and the ayah after it says, and don't touch those who are peaceful. Don't touch those who are peaceful. Yeah, well, it may say that. It didn't say just kill everybody, at least in the chapters that I read, but it said go kill the polytheists. But then it makes a claim that Christians did the same thing, and historically speaking, before the Crusades, Christians like never did that. So, people who followed Jesus, they didn't do that. O says, can a second dimension person comprehend the third dimension? Exactly. Here, Jimmy's calling me a scum of the earth. Jimmy says I'm the scum of the earth. See, Jesus said, bless those who curse you, love your enemies, bless your enemies, pray for your enemies. But Islam doesn't teach that. It doesn't teach what Jesus taught. Jesus was not a Muslim. Because this person's calling me a hypocrite and scum of the earth. That can be nowhere found for Jesus teaching us to do that. And to throw out false accusations by calling people gay. So that's actually a lie. The Bible says all liars will have their part in lake that burns with fire. So please don't lie. I mean, you can disagree. You can disagree. I don't care. I don't care if you disagree. Just don't make false accusations. Jimmy says you don't know anything about what Jesus taught. Well, we have the scriptures that were written by the people who knew him personally. Like, just because someone comes out 600 years later and says, I know the truth of what Jesus taught, and I'm getting divine revelation, doesn't mean we should just believe him. I'd rather believe the people that knew Jesus himself and walked with Jesus himself, who had tons of witnesses about what Jesus said himself. If we're talking about religious debate, we're not even talking about, if we're in a religious debate, it'd be much better to believe the people who actually knew Jesus than some guy that came out 600 years later that claimed to have some type of revelation about who Jesus was. In fact, so far, the Quran at least in the first 8 chapters, it doesn't really describe what Jesus taught, other than it claimed that that he taught that he wasn't God. Other than it claimed that. But other than that, it talks about how we're supposed to follow what Jesus taught. And so far, it doesn't tell us what Jesus taught. So Muslims don't even know what Jesus taught. Unless you go to the Gospels. The same Gospels that the Quran says were good. Jack says, why is everyone here completely insane? I don't know. Yassia says, Josiah, please understand the context before reading a surah. I agree with that. I agree. And that's why I'm trying to be charitable. And I'm trying to say, look, maybe I'm missing something. But when I read, I'm reading chapter by chapter. I'm not just reading a couple verses here and there. When I'm reading it, it seems to be saying these things. I appreciate that, though. Jimmy says, I'm regurgitating nonsense hate polemics that you see on YouTube. No, I'm literally reading the Quran. I'm telling you what I think because I don't want to just regurgitate what I'm hearing on YouTube. So, I encourage you to actually read the Gospels. Actually read the Gospels and find out what Jesus actually said. As I'm reading the Quran to see what Islam actually teaches, actually says, I encourage you to read the Gospels. Like, read through them. Jimmy says I'm repeating what David Wood says. I'm not actually just repeating what David Wood says. I'm reading the Quran and saying what the Quran says. Okay. He's tapping. I'm tapping and yapping. I like the rhymes. Let me see here. David says, loving your enemies won't make enemies love you. That's true. That is true. But Jesus told us to love our enemies. Something that Islam does not teach. It contradicts Jesus. It doesn't tell us to love our enemies. Otherwise, it wouldn't tell us to go and kill them. Let me see here. Yassia says, who said they hated Jesus? They hated Jesus? I'm not sure. Maybe I forgot the context of that. I know I'm not going to say every Muslim hates Jesus. I don't think so. But they don't love what Jesus teaches. If someone's a real Muslim, they're going to hate some of the things that Jesus teaches because the Quran teaches the opposite. Like, for example, Jesus teaches that he's the Son of God. The Quran says that this is like blasphemy, right? And so if a Muslim may say they love Jesus and they follow Jesus, but they choose not to believe the things that Jesus says, and they don't follow Jesus, and many times they would say that the things that are alleged that Jesus said are sinful. And if something is truly sinful, then sure, hate the sin. That's not an issue. But I know a lot of Muslims will say, oh, we follow Jesus. Well, the truth is, if you follow Jesus, you do the things that Jesus says. But you don't do the things that Jesus says because you teach something different, at least your book does. And Muslims do a lot of things that Jesus said not to do. So. Hassan says, yeah, sure, buddy. The Crusades were Christ followings, right? No, they weren't. See, I was actually responding to something the Quran teaches. The Quran teaches that Christians were commanded to go kill. Nowhere were Christians in the Gospels commanded to go kill. Nowhere. That's what I'm responding to. But in Islam, Muslims are commanded to go kill. Maybe not indiscriminately, but they're commanded to go kill and fight. Kill and be killed, it says. But then it makes the claim that Christians did the same thing, or that Christians were specifically taught the same thing. But we were never taught that, at least not before the time of Muhammad, not by Jesus. And that was the point. Let me see here. So Keedy says, Muslims don't hate what Jesus taught. Muslims believe what Jesus was sent with. But the unaltered version, like the version from 2,000 years ago. So in other words, we don't know what that version is, but we have to assume it was exactly as Muhammad said it was because we believe in Muhammad. See, Muhammad taught, the Quran teaches that we had the Injil, the gospel, at that time, especially the Torah. But that the Injil was also the truth, something that the Christians had, but the Christians weren't following according to the claims of the Quran. Now, we have the same Injil, the same gospel that Muhammad would have had during his time. And we have the manuscripts, the texts from hundreds of years before him. So they don't believe what Jesus taught because they believe what Muhammad taught. They believe what Islam teaches. They don't believe in what Jesus taught. Maybe some of the things about giving to charity, there are some things like that, and how God is one God and he is merciful, as Jesus taught, even in the gospel. But there's many things that they teach that are the opposite of what Jesus taught, and I find that very problematic. If a Muslim really believed, really understood what Jesus taught, I don't think they would. If they didn't take their information about Jesus from a script that came 600 years after Jesus, I think they would have a whole different picture about Jesus if they wanted to still believe their religion. Let me see here. I appreciate for Kitty, I appreciate the respectful dialogue. A lot of these people, they're just jerks, right? I'm trying not to be a jerk. I'm trying to be honest. A lot of these people are accusing me of things that I never said or never did, but you're being honest. I appreciate that. Yasia says there are also verses and chapters in the Bible that says to kill. Not in the New Testament, not for Christians. There are times like in the Old Testament where God was bringing the people of Canaan either into submission or out of Canaan because they were actually evil, atrocious people, killing their own children, committing all forms of sexual immorality and unrepentant. We see Israel's commanded to kill these people and to take the land that was promised to them. And then we see that Israel didn't actually kill all those people, but that was more of a euphemism for conquer everything. And we see they didn't kill everybody, although there was a lot of killing. But after that, especially during the Gospels, as a Christian, Jesus never commands us this. Jesus never commands Christians to go kill. That's not found in the New Testament. And that's what I was saying. The Quran claims that Jesus did teach us that the gospel that was revealed to Jesus did teach us, Christians, to kill and be killed. But Jesus never taught us that. We're supposed to live by love and live by kindness and live by faith in Jesus Christ, faith in God, to follow him. So Old Testament, yes, there's a couple passages that talk about it, mainly speaking of the land of Canaan and the people that came against Israel themselves. Like someone brought up Amalek, the people of Amalek, they came against the Jews first. So in a sense, it's like a form of defense. But when it came to the Canaanites, children of Israel did go in there. They did do wars as commanded by God. But outside of once they had Israel, God didn't really tell them to go outside of Israel and just go kill people who didn't believe. But in the New Testament specifically, God makes it very clear for Christians not to go kill. but instead love your enemies, bless those who curse you, bless and do not curse, do good to those who despitefully use you. If your enemy is hungry, give them something to eat. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. Yassia says, we Muslims also believe Jesus spoke as a baby. Yeah, I believe the Quran teaches that. That's based off of a gospel. I think it's based off the Gospel of Thomas, which was written about 100 years after Jesus. It was written in the 2nd century. And so Thomas wasn't even alive when it was written. That's why Christians don't use that book. They don't use the Gospel of Thomas because it's unreliable. It seems like a forgery to us, and it contradicts the things that the rest of the manuscripts that we have that do date back to the apostles' time. So Christians historically, before Islam existed, we rejected that book, the Gospel of Thomas, and many other false gospels, because they came at a later date and they promoted Gnostic heresies, Gnostic beliefs that were directly opposed to the God of Christianity, the God of the Old Testament. And so that's why as Christians we don't use the Gospel of Thomas. I understand that Muhammad seemed to have thought that that was the gospel, but that's not the gospel. We don't have any evidence from the people who knew Jesus personally that he spoke as a baby. I mean, it's possible. I'm not going to say he absolutely didn't, but the Gospel of Thomas and some of these other quote-unquote gospels that come in later dates, they're not to be trusted because they're claiming to be written by people who weren't even alive at the time. And that's kind of how Gnostics did things. They didn't mind lying. The Gnostics thought it was actually a good thing to go and lie and to steal and to cheat and to commit sexual immorality because they believe Jesus came to set us free from God's law so we don't have to do what's right anymore. But in fact, they believe that in order to gain more knowledge of things that were hidden from them by God, they would actually go and commit all these sins because they thought they would become more enlightened. The Gnostics were pretty wild. They were pretty wild. And so yeah, the Gospel of Thomas, I believe that's what the Gospel of Thomas, I believe that's where Muhammad got his idea of Jesus speaking as a baby. Kitty says, where did Jesus claim to be the Son of God? Yeah, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. John 3:16. For God did not send his Son into the world so that the world could be condemned, but that through him the world could be saved. He who believes in him, the Son of God, is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because they haven't believed on the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that the light, the Son of God, has come into the world, but men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen. And that's just one passage. That's just one passage off the top of my head. And that was the words of Jesus. That was the words of Jesus. Day says, hello, Mr. Bighead. Hey. Okay. Anton says, are you saying Christianity wasn't spread by the sword? Not before the time of Muhammad. I mean, maybe people say, oh, the Crusades. Jesus never commanded it, okay? Just because people go and they do things in the name of Jesus doesn't mean that Jesus commanded them to do it. Just as someone could go and commit some type of atrocity, like maybe starve an orphan, and say it was in the name of Allah, doesn't mean they're a Muslim. It would mean that they were lying, right? Or very, very, very deceived. But Jesus never taught that Christianity was to be spread by the sword, ever. Find it. Find it. So, find it for me. Find it for me. Let me see here. Yeah, and I don't think all of the Crusades were justifiable. I think a lot of them were actually Actually pretty bad. Kitty says, when was Jesus taught the New Testament? He brought it. He wasn't taught it. He was God come in the flesh, as Jesus indicated, and as he taught he was the Son of God. When did Jesus teach the New Testament? In his teachings. It's called the gospel. And the New Testament doesn't mean that God changed his ways. The New Testament basically means God came to earth to fulfill some of the old, but it doesn't mean that as Christians we have any right to break the old. But instead we have our high priest, Jesus Christ, and also the final sacrifice, Jesus Christ. But when it comes to following the law or following by faith the things that God wants, it's something Christians should do. Unpopular opinion in some circles, but there's many Christians who believe just like me. So let me see here. Yeah, Yasia says, well, the Torah got changed. It's not original. That's what Muslims will claim. But the Quran teaches, and this is something it actually says, okay, 2 different passages up till chapter 8. I've read up till chapter 8 so far. I'm still reading. So maybe I'll teach something later. But so far, it has actually said that the Torah that was revealed to Moses was with the Jews at the time of Muhammad. So he actually told them to go and judge by the things that are written in your book. So Muhammad either taught them to go and follow a corrupted book or a changed book, or Muhammad was telling them to go to a book that wasn't changed, and he was telling them to stop compromising their book, stop being hypocrites about their book, but go and actually follow it. That's what it seemed to be indicating, and he says that it was with them. And so we have the same Torah that they had during Muhammad's time, which means that we can know that the Torah, at least according to the Quran, is accurate and is not changed, is not corrupted. So yeah, and the main passage, there's 2 passages I found so far, but the main passage is very direct is in, I believe, Surah 6. It says that the Torah was handed to them. Good comment though. And a lot of people saying the Torah got altered by man. That's something that Muslims believe, but the Quran does not teach that the Torah was changed at its time. It teaches that the Jews had the Torah and that they weren't living by it, that they weren't following it as they were supposed to. And Muhammad actually commanded them to go do that. Yeah, so Yasia says the Bible was changed a lot of times. Yasia, I encourage you to study up on this. That's a claim that Muslims make, but I encourage you to actually study up on this. The Bible wasn't translated like from the Aramaic to Greek to English. It wasn't like Greek to German to English, but we actually get the original manuscripts and we translate them directly to our language and also to other languages as well. At least when it comes to the New Testament and the Old Testament, they were a lot more meticulous about how they kept it preserved. The rabbis were, and so it's a belief that the Quran is like the only thing that never changed. It's a belief, and it's okay if you believe that, but the Quran teaches that the Torah was the same Torah that the Torah they had at the time of the Quran was the same Torah that was given to Moses, and that they had that Torah. So in other words, the Torah from 600 AD was true, but Jews weren't following it according to the Quran. We have that same Torah, and so it hasn't been changed according to Islam, according to the Quran. But I encourage you to actually do more research into the biblical texts. And you can look at like the Muslim perspective, which has a bias. You can look at the Christian perspective, which has a bias. Everyone has a bias. Even secularists, they'll have a bias. Look at the different perspectives. Look at how people see this evidence, how people actually judge the evidence, and what makes it legitimate or illegitimate. I encourage you to do study into it. So let's see here. I don't got a lot more time. I'm gonna try to get like one more question here, but I gotta go. I appreciate the kind comments. I appreciate the kind comments. And people being respectful. I do appreciate that. Yasia says, whoever says it teaches killing, he doesn't understand the context. Maybe I don't understand the context. But it says to kill and be killed, and this was the way of the Jews and the Christians, and now it's the way of the Muslims. That's what it says. I mean, maybe I'm missing the context. Usually when someone says that they're going to kill me, I believe them. Or at least I believe them, I give them the benefit of the doubt, right? So the idea of killing and being killed, and that being taught by Jesus, I don't think so. Maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe I'm missing the context. Maybe I need to read it again. But that's what it seems to have said from someone who's never read it, and I'm reading it. That's what it seems to talk. I believe it's Surah 8. But yeah, I'll give it to you. You need to look at context. I encourage Muslims like, the Bible says this. I encourage you to look at the context. Look at the context. Because both Christians and Muslims are guilty of not going to context. I think that it is the context because I read the whole chapter in context. But, maybe I missed something. Maybe. But from what I saw, it didn't seem like it. John says speak in tongues. No, I'm not going to speak in tongues. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go to the very end here. There's the very end. There's so many comments, guys, I can't even get to the end. It would have taken me a long time to get to the end. Kitty says, there are verses in the Quran where Allah names prophets and honors them, including Jesus. Literally verses about honoring Jesus and Moses. Yeah, and that's actually very interesting. The Quran teaches that David was given the Psalms, those same Psalms that we have. But then in Psalm 22, he describes the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, something that the Quran denies. It also says Zechariah was someone from God, but Zechariah taught that God said through Zechariah, telling to the Jews, God says, they will look upon me, whom they have pierced. How can you pierce God? How can you pierce God? What does that mean? Well, when you read Isaiah 53, when you read the Psalm of David 22, when you read many other passages in the Old Testament, it makes sense. But I do have to go, guys. Otherwise, I'm going to be late. I am going to be going live at 8:30 tonight for Ask a Christian Anything. So Zoe, I don't have a lot of time. I will have to leave now. But feel free to come on, and if any of you guys want to come on and have a conversation about this, I would love to have you join me on my live stream tonight at 8:30 EST. 8:30 EST. Zoe says her rib pain is completely gone. Amen. And so if you guys want to come and join me, you'll have an opportunity to get on and we can chat. We can talk about some of these things I'm bringing up. And as long as you're respectful, you don't curse, and you don't be like a perv. And I think most of the people on right now are not pervs. I have had Muslims on here that were just pervs, but then I've had Muslims that seem like really respectful people. I appreciate that. And so for sure. But I do have to go, guys. So God bless you all, and I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful, wonderful day. And until next time, Follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. God bless you, Yasia. God bless you, Kitty. God bless you, Fallen. God bless you, Zoe. God bless you, Gitch. God bless you, Dave, Nubs, Josh, Anton, Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh's on here. God bless you guys. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful day. And we'll see you guys tonight at 9 p.m. EST. Bye-bye.